The Crow 2024 is directed by Rupert Sanders and stars Bill Skarsgård, F.K. Twigs, Danny Houston, among others. And this is a new adaptation of the comic book series of the same name. And in this story, it deals with Eric, him and his girlfriend Shelley are murdered by some bad guys, similar to the original 1994 film. And he comes back to life, getting the power of the crow, and has to stop them. That's pretty much the basic plot of it, even though it kind of gets itself a little convoluted in some other areas that I'll get into, but it is your typical revenge story. Now here's a little backstory. Now this movie was directed by Rupert Sanders, who I've not minded some of the movies that he's directed before. He did direct Snow White and the Huntsman, which I really enjoyed, and then the okay-ish Ghost in the Shell. This was actually a movie that I was actually really not looking forward to. And to go back to the beginning, I've always considered myself a really big fan of the original film from 1994 that starred Brandon Lee and tragically his last film that he did. And even though I didn't read the comics, I still feel like the original 1994 movie holds up as one of my all-time favorite films of the 90s, and it really was coming off the success of Tim Burton's Batman with trying to go with that gothic type of route with being in that grunge era and everything, but also telling a very tragic tale of Eric Draven and Shelley that were murdered by these criminals that pretty much, they were just innocent people. And the revenge story that it told, and also the very great atmosphere, the soundtrack, Brandon Lee's iconic performance as Eric Draven, and the rest of the cast on top of that too. If you got Michael Wincott, you also got as Top Dollar, and you also got Ernie Hudson. Like, that movie is just sparks around as we were getting that kind of trend of seeing more movies that were coming in that type of gothic type of style, like kind of also similar to The Shadow that came out around that same time, and other films that were following the Tim Burton Batman, and it really worked in its own regard. And to this day, it feels like to me it's one of those movies that it is hard to watch because it is tragically Brandon Lee's last film that he did before he died, because he was accidentally killed on set. But the movie still lives on as its own right because it captures a lot of that very emotional integrity of the story that plays out, and it's just something that I feel like is a one and done type of movie. And for many years, the movie has tried to really continue with different forms of having 3 sequels that came out with the not so great City of Angels, which I actually have a soft spot for that one because even though it was very butchered by the studio, and I believe there is a director's cut that hopefully that does probably exist in some way that I wish would actually come out one of these days, because I feel like the director has a great movie hidden on there somewhere. But City of Angels, I feel like, is the only one that I feel is, even though it's very flawed, it still it works in its own regard with trying to do something that's that at least try to do a different character. But also it had problems with rehashing the stuff that we seen from the first film and everything. But I still thought it was a good type of emotional story that I got myself into. It just suffered from a lot of other stuff that really kept it behind the scenes from being great. And then Salvation, I actually did get a chance to finally watch last night for the first time, and to be honest, I actually really didn't mind that one so much. It is definitely a way step down compared to the first two, but it's nowhere near as great as the first one. But I still think that it did something a little different, where it was a character that was wrongfully accused and getting killed, execution style in prison stuff. I like the concept they at least took with trying to switch it up, and I did like the cast in it. It did its own kind of thing where it wasn't trying to really copy the first one, even though it used like familiar elements and stuff. It still kept the formula going with trying to do something different that I got myself into in parts, especially with the whole stuff that was going on with the murder that takes the actual setup of why the guy gets wrongfully accused and stuff. Now, I haven't seen Wicked Prayer, but I heard that one's actually the worst, and I also haven't seen the TV series that came out, but I really did feel like for many years that The Crow just really didn't seem like those kind of movies that needed a franchise. It's kind of like how I feel with the Highlander series. Some movies, they're meant to be one and done, and unless you're really going to do something that's kind of different like they did with 2 and 3, there were ideas that they were throwing out for many years of what we were trying to get. In fact, even at one point, Rob Zombie was even going to do one where we were going to probably get like a futuristic type of Crow movie, which would have been interesting, but I could see why that one probably didn't get made because it would have been too straying away from the other films, and it probably wouldn't have been really following much of the source material that much, but it would have been something at least different enough that I could still probably see how it would work. But there were different directors and actors that were really considered for the role of the Crow for many years. But my biggest problem with them trying to do like another adaptation of the story like it was with another adaptation of the comic is that it always seems like they were trying to go back to Eric Draven. And my problem is that for me personally, I don't really think that's the kind of story that needs to be told with these type of movies, because Brandon Lee made the Crow so iconic that it's really hard to really see anyone really top that. Yes, we did get in the TV series, I heard, and even I heard that one wasn't that good either. So it's like, I really feel like the Crow is one of those kind of franchises that if you're going to make another film, you need to probably do a different character because it works better in that regard. And then because there were big names that actually came up over the years, and I kind of wondered where they were going to go with it, because they had actors like Luke Evans. You had at one point Bradley Cooper, Jason Momoa. Those would have been some really interesting choices, but I don't know how they would have played out, because as long as they weren't playing, I don't know if they were going to play Eric Draven or if they're going to play different characters, but they probably would have did something, at least probably a different take than what we got. Because with this one, even from the trailers, I still wasn't looking forward to it, because I just wasn't getting the vibe that it was really doing something really. It really felt like it was really feeling not only like a Crow for the modern times, which I know that's the whole point they were going for, but it feels like it was just more of a typical revenge type of story that looked very generic from the trailers. And it didn't even really seem like it had much of a style, because even in the comic books, from what I heard, the graphic novels or the comic books that the Crow is based off of, it has a unique style and look that it's going for. And while there were the first images that came up that showed was similar to another to a part that was from another graphic novel that looked similar to what we got with Bill Skarsgård's character in this, it did seem like they didn't really know if they were following the source material or not, because from what I heard, that character that they showed that the image that was inspired by wasn't even called Eric Draven in the comics. So it's like the filmmakers in this, or the people behind this film, it almost seems like they didn't really know what to do with the source material, or really understand the source material, what they're going for. And so, after upon seeing this film, I can honestly say this is going to be probably one of the worst comic films I've seen, this along with Madam Web, all year, because it really shows that there is really so much lack of soul in this film that it's just really a dull and such a slog to get through of how boring it is, and it is dragged out to the point where I felt nothing with this at all. This is what you don't do with a comic book movie, and making it to where even the revenge story, I really did not give a shit about. So, if I'm going to get any kind of pros, we'll have to say that the gore is good in this, for the most part. There is some noticeable CGI in some parts where some of the death scenes look kind of fake looking, especially when we get to the opera part. But even that opera part, I will say that it's the only part of the film that I feel works in that regard, because there's actually some good blood that takes place and good gore and stuff, and the creative kills that Skarsgård is basically using, that Eric is pretty much killing all the people on. The way that the kills are set up and everything, it is very creative in certain ways, the way he's slicing with the sword and stuff. So there's that. And then I will have to also say too is that I'm very hit and miss with Skarsgård, because even though I think that he still tried to do what he could with the material, it just really feels like his performance is all over the place, where at parts he definitely feels like he feels genuine, but at the other times it feels very like whiny. And I don't know if this is just me, but I was kind of getting some kind of like flashbacks to him, his performance wise, and this could have to do with the writing and directing too, but it definitely felt like I was getting flashbacks to watching Anakin from episode 2 Attack of the Clones, in that very kind of whiny kind of way, the way that he delivered some of his lines and stuff. And I know this is more of a fault with probably the directing and writing on that regard, but it definitely felt like there were parts where he didn't really seem like he was, bringing his A game, so to speak. But then other parts where, he's killing people left and right as the Crow and stuff, those work fine in some of the action parts that he's good in, but it's just a lot of the most part when he's just having the more emotional parts here and there. I just really felt like he was very, he was very kind of like, I just felt he was lacking in some of those parts. Then I'm also really not big on the look they give the Crow in this. I know that they're trying to update it for the times or anything like that, but even with that, it still doesn't really come across as the type of Crow in this, because the kind of makeup they give with him and stuff, it just really seems like in the giving him basically that kind of mullet look, I'm just not really a big fan of, and it really just seems to, even if they're trying to go for that kind of like emo-ish type of vibe and stuff, it just really doesn't really scream the Crow to me, And even if they're trying to take inspiration from that comic book that it's from, it still doesn't make sense, because it wasn't even written by the same guy, James O'Barr, did the original comic book. So the movie can't even really follow its own source material right. And I also didn't buy his chemistry with Shelley in this. I actually really, the really thing that struggled the most in this, I feel like, now I'll get to my cons, is that I didn't really feel any semblance of caring. the movie is already also is already bad to a bad start, where you get into some really rough editing in the beginning, where you see Eric as a little kid and he sees a dead horse, and it's supposed to symbolize some stuff that happens later on, where you get to see some as it takes place and stuff, where he's having dreams about his childhood and everything, and he's also, you come to find out that he has like a quick backstory where he had an abusive mother and stuff like that. But these flashbacks they set up with both him and Shelley, they really feel like they're really edited weird, to where it's all jumbled all over the place. And that is also another issue I've had with some of the Crow sequels, is that the editing can be a frenetic nightmare in some parts, where it's all over the place, where you're seeing stuff happening like that. And so it just really seemed like it was very jumbled. And on top of that, with the way that the story is setting itself up, I didn't really feel anything with where we're going, because already from the beginning we're led to learn that Eric is basically coping with, his past and stuff, but he's basically a drug addict, and him and Shelley are also into drugs and stuff like that. And it just really feels like it's one of those where I don't really feel like these are the kind of characters to really latch onto, because, and I know this is comparing to the original, but even in the other Crow movies that I've seen so far, even those characters, the ones in 1, 2, 3, they didn't start out doing, criminal activities and stuff. They just start out as innocent people that were caught in the wrong kind of people, that were in the wrong place, wrong type of crowd. Because even in the third movie with Salvation, even in that one, we're led to believe that supposedly that our main guy killed someone, but you find out that it's not the case. And even so, this is already a problem I have with this one, where we're already not even treated to characters that you even like from the start. And so there's that. And on top of that, I also really didn't get into Danny Houston as a villain in this, because he just plays that same kind of like type of villain that I've seen in other films. And while he does have a sinister presence in some other movies I've seen, here he's just that same kind of. This is a very generic type of villain that could set something up. And this is going to get into some spoilers, so for those of you who haven't seen it yet, you have to be warned. They set something up where he pretty much has the ability to make people kill themselves with this kind of ability. It's kind of like the stuff we see in the Smile movie that came out a couple years ago, and then also, funny enough, we got the trailer for the second one coming out later. But they don't really explain much about his character much, and it's really inconsistent of whether he's supposed to be immortal or what's going on here, because it's very vague. But it's just very basic, and the whole movie is just from point A to point B, from Eric and trying to get revenge and trying to bring Shelley back, because once we get into stuff where them two die and he comes back to life, the whole point is that he's coming across as seeing this type of, like, I guess, guardian angel type of thing that's around him, that's telling him about, he comes across this guy that tells him that in order to succeed with bringing Shelley back, he has to kill the head honcho, because apparently Shelley is in the underworld, and I guess in hell, and he goes. It almost in a way kind of becomes like a action revenge type of movie, like if you would see in What Dreams May Come, because I was getting that kind of vibes. Like, the movie is not only ripping off the opening credits of David Fincher's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo with the whole blood and stuff like that, and that really slimy look, but also it's ripping plot points off from a better film that did something where it's exploring the afterlife, when that was What Dreams May Come. Only difference is that in that film, it was actually going through a whole journey where the character was actually in the afterlife the whole time, and in this one, he's coming back on Earth to pretty much try to save her from being returned. But even the plot with this also wanders into some really what the fuck territory that I'll get into later on. But it goes along where he's pretty much trying to find some information and stuff. And keep in mind, while he's doing all this stuff, we don't really get much of the Crow type of vibe in this, because other than the fact that the Crow is basically revives him and stuff like that, you could have really cut out the Crow entirely, because it really serves no purpose other than just reviving him and stuff like that. Because even in the other films, they pretty much have the Crow have it as basically a guide with our main character going on the run and looking and getting revenge and everything. Here, it really serves no purpose other than getting reaction shots, which is stupid. And then, we get into more of the stuff where he's getting into the final climax and everything, where you see the opera scene, like I was telling you earlier, and like I said earlier, and it was one of those where the action scene is fine. It's just that I didn't really feel anything with the overall structure, because it seems like it also felt inconsistent. It felt like it was, it almost became like it was almost like Eric was becoming pretty much a slasher villain in this case, because not only is he killing the actual henchman of the main baddie, but also, this is a major spoiler, he kills the woman that was also involved. He also kills this woman that's involved, and it almost really seemed like he has no remorse for it, because she's unarmed, and she's telling him about what happened, and that, about how Shelley deserved to die and everything. But the fact that, he doesn't have like any kind of way of trying to redeem her, or setting anything to have her to where she can maybe like fall victim into something else or whatever. No, he just flat out murders her and cuts her head off, and then it gets into more stuff. And then when we get to the final climax, he ends up having this battle that takes place between him and Danny Houston's character. And at first I was kind of wondering if it was going to lead to something like bigger, where he could use more of his powers and stuff like that. But no, he just ends up using his power. He just goes up to him and does this weird thing where, and this is something that I kind of like, I found myself really, that was really bizarre, where every time he goes up to a victim, he ends up whispering something in their ear and stuff, and the way that it's coming across, it looks very unintentionally hilarious at points, and it looks really bizarre, and pretty much he's trying to brainwash him into like dying and everything like that, but then he throws him out the window and they get in their final fight, and it's just very quick and to the point. And it's very anticlimactic. And then after that, it actually gets into an ending that I thought was like really like what the fuck when I was in the theater watching it. Where after he pretty much resurrects Shelley from hell, or wherever the underworld is and everything, he ends up basically sacrificing his life so that she can live. I felt like this whole journey was essentially fucking pointless in this regard, because unless they're trying to, I think the intent was that they're trying to set up sequels so that he can come back later and stuff. But if you've seen the other films, and also, I don't know if this is from the comics, but I thought the whole point was that basically once the person kills in their revenge, they pretty much go to the afterlife to be reunited with their loved ones. That's what I always thought was the whole purpose of the entire franchise. But here, no, it's just so that she can resurrect and live her own life. But honestly, she doesn't even really seem like she deserves it, because we later find out, and not to backtrack, but we find out that she was brainwashed into killing someone that she didn't want to do, which I understand it's all about remorse and redeeming yourself. But even before all that, we learn all that stuff, as a character, there's nothing really to her where she earns that. And so, man, this was definitely... And also, what's really confusing is that when this is happening at the very end, when she gets resurrection, she basically wakes up next to Eric with his dead body. And unless they're doing something else, or if this was supposed to be ambiguous, it really makes no fucking sense, because it's also making me wonder if this was supposed to be a fucking dream the whole time. And if that's the case, then that makes the entire film completely fucking pointless, to where none of the stuff that Eric is doing in this film has like any bearing, where we're led to believe that if it was a dream, then she pretty much wakes up and the bad guys are still alive. I don't know if that was what they're going for or what, but if that was the intention, that really failed in all regards. And on top of that too, I also had a really big issue with the CGI in points, where some of the bodies that you see like crumble and stuff like that, they looked really fake. And even some of the blood effects, while they can be good at points, it come across as very, a little CGI in points is like that, in parts of that. But overall, this movie was just a fucking mess. And I haven't read the comics, so maybe one of these days I'll actually check out James O'Barr's original comic book series, and also maybe some of the other ones they've also adapted or anything like the other comics that they've done. But even just going by this own film, it still doesn't work, because as a revenge story, it's boring, and it's something that we've seen countless times, and it's very generic. As a Crow adaptation, it still fails, because even if this was not supposed to be Eric Draven, and it's supposed just so happens to be Eric from a different type of character, it still fails, because you also don't have a character that I really cared about to really earn his revenge and everything. You want a better movie that had Bill Skarsgård where he's getting revenge? Go watch Boy Kills World. The movie didn't do well financially, but I still felt like that movie had a lot of great fun stuff, and it was something that I really latched onto, because in that one too, he also showed he had a great performance in that, where he was mostly silent, and he was doing a lot of the physicality and stuff. And while he does do that here, where he's good in the action scenes department, it just feels like, and I've seen Bill Skarsgård in a lot of great things that he's done, I'm just saying, but here he's given really nothing material to work with, because he comes across as just very, inconsistent, like very, like, hollow in points, and just not really that good as the character. And so overall, there's more I can go into detail, but that's pretty much the gist of it. And so with that, this is going to be one of the worst movies this is going to be on my shit list for one of the worst movies of the year. And with that, I'm giving this a flat line on the Film Freaks meter. And so Those of you who've also seen the new Crow film and also the other films in the franchise, let me know in the comments of what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.